Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier with my second presentation on whether Nazi Germany really was a totalitarian state or not. Balance is so important in a question C. So how do you bring balance to an answer to this question? Well, the Nazis were a pretty disorganized, chaotic bunch in many ways. There were still socialists, communists and liberals too. There were the churches, and there were those pesky young people who wouldn't toe the line. But let's first consider the Nazis themselves. Were the Nazis all on the same page? Was Hitler the kind of leader, like Stalin or Mao, who had an input into just about everything, poring over the detail of policies and making sure they were fully implemented? After the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler's control over the party was not in doubt. Yet the Nazis' control over themselves was not as tight as it was over the German people. There were three recognizable, if overlapping, problems. The first was that often different Nazi leaders would be competing with each other for the same resources, for example in the military. Similarly, a Nazi organization might be competing with a state organization. After all, the SS was seen as a state within a state. And added to this, as if there wasn't enough confusion, local organizations might interpret central directives in very different ways. We also need to look at Hitler and the way he worked. We can say with confidence that all major decisions were made by him, either instigated by him or else requiring his approval. For example, although there is no written order to point to as concrete evidence, the Holocaust would not have happened without Hitler's say-so. But the Nazis operated in a manner that has been referred to by the historian Ian Kershaw as working towards the Führer. They, that is the Nazis, and state officials were aware of Hitler's views on a given subject or issue, the Jews for example, and would work towards implementing them. But this could lead to confusion. Linked to this was Hitler's character and the way in which he organized himself. Hitler was not a workaholic. He was an insomniac and would stay up very late. Consequently, he would rise late, and often his day would only start with lunch. He would oversee meetings, but he hated paperwork. Evenings would be taken up with dinner and lots of talking, with Hitler doing most of the talking, and watching movies. It was a pretty loose approach to running a state. Let's look at policy too. Hitler didn't want to push his luck with the Catholic Church, hence the Concordat with the Pope. True, church schools were closed. Those Protestant ministers and Catholic priests who had been more vocal in their opposition to the regime were arrested. But many more remained active. And the 1939 census in the Greater Reich, this totalitarian Reich, revealed a population that still identified itself as bound to a church. And when in 1941 the Nazis in Bavaria tried to remove crucifixes from schools, they met with such opposition that the majority of those that had been removed were returned. And we should also note the confusion within the Nazi Party itself. For while some local Nazi leaders instigated beatings and even murders of priests, Others attended church regularly and even sang in the choir. In the broader party, now numbering some 3 million people, the majority still registered as Christians. Sometimes the people's will prevailed too. Kristallnacht was a step too far in 1938. The German people were appalled by what had happened, and the Nazis had to ease off. And public protest made the Nazis stop the euthanasia program in 1941, though it was restarted in secret. And there were those pesky teenagers. There was the swing movement, a non-political cultural movement. Like the rest of Western youth, they loved jazz, and particularly the swing dance bands. Swing clubs could be found in most big German cities. A working-class youth movement that grew up to have a strong political dimension was the Edelweiss Pirates. There were groups of pirates again in most large German cities, though they were not linked to each other. At weekends they would go hiking and camping, and if they met up with Hitler youth groups they would taunt them and sometimes fight them. The local group in Cologne went a lot further though. The slide here shows Barthel Schenk, a member of the Cologne group, who was executed for planning to blow up the Gestapo headquarters in the city. The group gave shelter to army deserters and escapees from the concentration camps, and in 1944 a small group assassinated the head of the Cologne Gestapo. And there was the White Rose Group, a group of Munich University students who distributed leaflets calling the Nazi regime a dictatorship of evil and criticising the Nazis' murder of Jews and Poles, as well as the lack of response from the German people. They urged Germans not to help the war effort. These were small groups that didn't have a great effect, more's the pity, but along with the churches and the socialists, the communists and the liberals who continued to oppose the Nazi regime, they do throw a question mark over Hitler's totalitarian state. And I should make a point here about the Hitler Youth too. Behind the membership numbers of the youth movement that were impressive, we have to ask how many children actually regularly attended meetings, and of them, how many were committed members, beyond enjoying the sport and the camping trips. And yet, though opposition did increase after 1941, more so as the Allies advanced on Berlin from both east and west, there was no national rebellion. The attempts by army officers to assassinate Hitler were made by isolated groups. As for the Nazi Party itself, as I've said, the Night of the Long Knives had settled things there. No one questioned Hitler's authority. So although there is another side to the debate, it does seem reasonable to say that Nazi Germany was indeed a totalitarian state. So there you are. Over 2 presentations I've achieved balance, but I've still come down firmly on one side of the debate. Now this is the kind of thing I do in tutorials, if you're interested, and if I have a slot free. Just get in touch with me, or better still, get your parents to, at historymadeeasier@gmail.com, and we'll see if we can come up with something. But for now, thank you so much for listening, and good luck with your studies. Cheers.